Welcome back, my dear students. We will discuss on the topic origin of chordata. What is the Dipleurula concept and the echinoderm theory of the origin of the chordata. It is believed that different types of echinoderm larvae are probably evolved from a basic larval group that is the Dipleurula larva. And the Dipleurula larva contain some common characteristic features. They have basic bilateral symmetry in marked contrast to the pentamerous radial symmetry of the adults. Winding over the larval body surface, that is varying number of ciliated bands which help in locomotion. Initially, the embryo is covered entirely by cilia. During coelom formation, the surface cilia disappear except the ciliated bands, and the appearance of such bands mark the transformation of the embryo into a larva. There is a complete functional digestive tract, and the ciliated bands collect food particles. Pre-swim in planktonic life of variable duration. The lateral larval stages of many echinoderms possess short or long cylinder projections or arms from the body wall. These arms are helpful to distinguish of different larval stage of echinoderms. These arms disappear during larval life and are not equivalent to the arms of the adult echinoderms. Now, the two basic groups are present in case of the echinoderms. That is a auricularia group. Auricularia group consists of auricularia larva, bipinnaria larva, and vacuolaria larva. Whereas the pluteus group, that is another group that consists of the ophiopluteus and echinopluteus, and some other special type of larval forms are also present. Vitellaria larva, pentacrinoid larva, doliolaria larva, etc. Now, Bether, 1900, they propounded that the hypothetical ancestral form of the echinoderms, they consist of bilateral symmetry body with preoral lobe. That is a preoral lobe. You see here, absence of the skeletal formation, ventrally placed mouth and the anus, and presence of three pairs of the sac, exocoel, hydrocoel, and somatocoel with two water pores. It has been imagined by many workers that this larva holds the key of echinoderm ancestry, but it was not possible to explain the derivation of some vital echinoderm features, that is the water vascular system and its development of the coelom. In case of the deuterostome, the coelom formation is enterocoely, whereas in case of the protostome, the coelom formation is a cytocoely, that is a splitting of mesodermal layer. So the development of the coelom formation in case of the echinoderm, that is differ from the protostomes. And according to Bether, 1900, water vascular system originates as three ciliated groups, which become five by the subsequent subdivision of the two lateral group. The available interpretation on the origin of the water vascular system are not supported by embryological data. And embryological studies showed that the water vascular system arose as the outgrowths of the body wall in the form of the tentacles. Now, what is the echinoderm theory? The theory was proposed by Johannes Muller in 1860, based on the comparative studies of the larval stages of the echinoderms and hemichordates. You know, the larva of the hemichordates is the tornaria larva, and larva of the echinoderms are categorized into two groups. One is the auricularia group and another is the pluteus group. That possesses ciliary bands and the apical tufts of cilia. This is apical tufts of cilia in case of the doliolaria larva. In case of the tornaria larva, this is apical tufts of cilia, and this is the ciliated band. These are the ciliated band in case of the auricularia larva. So the tornaria larva of the hemichordates and bipinnaria auricularia larva of the echinoderms, they possess some common characteristic features. What are the characteristic features? Presence of apical tuft of cilia and possesses ciliary bands. Now the origin and ancestor of the modern chordates is not very clear and remains obscure because their early ancestor, most liable, were soft-bodied forms, and yet no fossil remains to give us clue about their origin. Therefore, based on anatomical, embryological, paleontological, biochemical, and serological evidences. Various workers had tried to establish that the chordates probably had originated directly from some primitive echinoderms or some echinoderm larvae. The tornaria larva of the Baranoglossus and the larva of the echinoderms, they exhibit close similarity. You see here, this is the banded pattern and the morphology that are more or less similar in structure. Now, Johannes Muller, 1860, and William Bateson, 1885, suggested that the tornaria larva and the Dipleurula larva, they have evolved from a common ancestral source. And what are the common features? The body is minute and transparent. Both have a dorsal pore, almost identical twisted external ciliated bands that are present, formation and disposition of the coelom that are similar in nature. Both are free swimming forms and body is bilateral symmetrical. Now, the presence of the apical plate with eye spot in tornaria larva raised doubt about the common ancestry for the echinoderms and hemichordates. Walter Gaston, 1894, and G.R.D. Beer, 1928, proposed that echinoderm larvae gave rise to chordates by Neoteny. They suggested that probably the auricularia larva of echinoderms became sexually mature, and later these Neotenic larvae gave rise to chordates. Gaston, 1894, also imagined that if the ciliated bands together with underlying nervous tissue of auricularia larva of echinoderms concentrate to form ridges, leaving a groove between them, and if the leaves of the groove fuses subsequently, it will give rise to, it will resemble with the nervous system of the chordates. Now, the most primitive echinoderms are that of Cambrian and Ordovician carpoid echinoderms. Torsten and Gislen assume that the carpoid echinoderms might have evolved from tornaria-like creatures, which have begun to settle down to lead a sedentary life. The water vascular system might have developed out of ciliated group of the tornaria-like creatures, and it has also been claimed that the lower Silurian, one of the carpoid echinoderms, had the calyx perforated by series of 16 small apertures, and these apertures are compared with the gill slits of the cephalochordata in Branchiostoma, especially. The discovery of the fossil echinoderms that call calcichordata from Ordovician period, approximate 450 million years ago, further confirms echinoderm ancestry of the chordates. Calcichordates were asymmetrical animals which demonstrate affinity with both echinoderms and chordates, but their skeleton is made up of calcium carbonate. Whereas in vertebrates, the bones are made up of hydrated calcium and phosphate. They had large pharynx with a series of gill slits, each covered with flap for filter feeding, a small segmented body, and a post-anal tail. A perforated pharynx for filter feeding appears to have evolved in diverse group of animals during Cambrian Ordovician period, when planktons are much abundant in water. Now, the phylogenetic relationship between the echinoderms and the chordates has been shown by biochemical studies. Most of the non-chordates conduct energy transfer with arginine phosphate, but ophiuroids, cephalochordates, ascidians, and vertebrates use creatinine phosphate. The hemichordates and echinoids use both arginine phosphate as well as creatinine phosphate. Needham, 1932, mentioned that the presence of phosphagen as the phosphorus carrier in the echinoderms and chordates, whereas Wilhelmy, 1942, has shown the affinity between two groups by serological test. All these isolated biochemical studies put weight on the concept of derivation of chordates from echinoderms. Now, the descent of chordates from the echinoderms by the direct transformation of the echinoderm or its Neotenous larva into a chordate, that is no longer accepted nowadays. So, what is the accepted view? That the living echinoderms and the living chordates, They have a common immediate ancestor. These are the reference books: The Ancestry of the Chordata, William Battison's, and another good book, The Origin of the Larva, Donald Ray Williamson. Thank you, everybody.